You are listening to Whole Earth Radio.
This is the rebirth of Whole Earth Radio.
And we are live. This is Rob Seaman, and I'm talking to Brian Siskind.
What is up?
What is up, my brother?
This is, people say that all the time, but you're rarely saying it to somebody that you actually haven't spoken to in 30 years.
Yeah.
It's a huge question in that context.
It has been, it's been a really long time.
Yeah.
And I have mostly been in contact with you through social media.
Yeah. I mean, we've managed to keep in touch, but it's sort of like, it's awesome. This has been one of the nice things about sort of the times that we're in, is it has just made it that much more amenable and easy, and everybody's getting the gist of video conferencing and stuff down now. So it has opened up, it's like another layer of sort of digital transformation has sort of happened, or whatever you want to call it, so it's been cool to benefit from that. And this is I'm glad to be on your podcast.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, and I do, there's a million things we could talk about. And as you're alluding to the fact that, 30 years ago, you and I were both in high school, went to the same high school, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I guess I could just say the name. I can just say Mount Tabor, right?
Yeah.
And I'd like to acknowledge and thank you and give gratitude for all those rides to school. Because I know I didn't thank you 30 years ago.
Well, the thing is, I just want to get right out in front of everything and just say that you were one of those people in high school that to me was a bit of a hero, because you were always on the front, sort of DIY, you were a person that made things happen. And since in my life, I think people, with all the various things that I've done, I've been referred to as sort of a person that's kind of like that, like sort of just don't talk about it, let's just do it, or like, why not try it, or let's organize this thing, or whatever. I tend to be kind of one of those people, I suppose. And I suppose that maybe you were sort of one of the first people I ever saw, because, when you're 17 and I see you, and you're like, I've got a venue, we're putting on shows, there's flyers all over town, there's a whole scene, there's a whole situation, with everything that you did with New Start and all that. I mean, that was the first example I had. I can think of later examples, of maybe where people that are all of a sudden doing something that you would like to do, or they maybe get famous for something, or get really skilled at something, or whatever it is. When you see people that are of your culture and place, and then you see them applying themselves and making that happen, it's super inspiring. It's proof of concept, right, at a young age. And you were one of those people. And not long after those times when I started really playing music, and all of that, I was organizing festivals, and I was, and honestly, it's kind of, I don't mean, this doesn't sound right, but it's sort of like, if Rob can do it, I can do it. No,
it does sound right.
No, but you created a spirit of, a spirit of the time. And so for that, I'm always grateful, man.
Well, thank you. I will tell you a story that I didn't think of until you just said that. And it was of being maybe 18 and renting the first New Start. And because, real estate in Winston-Salem in 1990 was like pretty cheap.
Like, are you sure you'll take it? Sign it. You're great. Yeah.
$200 sound good? And so my gig, of course, I wasn't going to say, look, I'm going to fill this club up with all ages, audience and musicians. I wasn't going to tell them what I was really going to do with the venue. So I said, I'm a filmmaker, little white lie. Because we were going to film the shows, right?
Sure.
We were going to make videos of the shows. But I said, and then, when really just want to store film equipment here. And so I remember talking to this very straight-laced real estate agent, and he's showing me the place, and well, this looks great. Okay, I'll take it. Before, he realizes there's like two of me standing on top of each other under this trench coat, I feel like. And he and we're done, and we're leaving, and I'm the filmmaker, and he turns to me and he says, Rob, you're not going to make porno here, are you? And I thought he had busted me. He was going to say, you're not going to do hardcore shows here, are you? But I was just like, Oh, what a relief. No, sir, I can absolutely guarantee you,
Yeah.
that I will not be doing porno here.
Yeah. Not on purpose.
Anyway, I mean, the idea that you can do something, I think, starts with the audacity
Yeah.
to just jump in
Yes.
and make that call on
Yep.
that number on that vacant building and say, we could do that. And
Yep.
then you figure it out. Well, do we need a permit? That didn't come up in Winston-Salem in 1990, but
Mhm.
I'm sure, well, it came up on down the road doing other things, but
It's also like a testament to how litigious society has become, because I mean, think about the liabilities that were going on there in terms of, stage diving and just all the, you know what I mean? Just it's funny to think about how, like, back then everything was very careless and nobody wore seatbelts and there wasn't all this sort of padded society type stuff. And really, I mean, bad stuff did happen, but not any more bad stuff than what would be, I guess, under normal situations. But anyway, yeah, like, you did such an amazing job with that, and with your music projects and just everything else. It's a cool thing, and I feel like that we were sort of always a little bit, not on the outside. I think that we were people that were friends with a lot of different types of kids, groups, but at the same time we were sort of hustlers and had to get out of there and get moving. There's something to do, some mission to be on.
well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. And I was thinking similarly of, I think influencing, like, I had maybe that energy that you noticed and were influenced by to some small degree. And I was just thinking, I'm wearing the fly by night shirt here. I was just thinking because it's kind of like you were saying, when we knew each other, we were both really into music and influencing each other with different kinds of music. I was actually playing music, or doing something like playing music, but you didn't actually start playing music till later. And I was recounting, where you actually, I remember you handing me the tape of This Is Me playing what I remember as incredibly avant jazz in like 93 or 94. And it just really, I was really like, good for you, because like, punk rock was outside of the mainstream, but there were things, in my record collection you might call difficult listening, that I would find one or two people, here and there where it would overlap, and they'd be like, I mean, just even the in-between stuff, which doesn't seem that obscure now, like, I don't know, Captain Beefheart, or,
Can or something, or
like things that, you mean you don't have this? You haven't heard this?
Like, you can put it on a party and people won't all of a sudden stop what they're doing and be like, will you turn that off? It's not that. It's just a little like listenable out there music. Yeah, there's levels. Yeah, there's levels. I mean, I think it's funny that just it's the when you're young, you're especially like I mean, I was a drummer, so it was all about like how I needed to see how far I could go technically, or you just want to dive into the most challenging thing. So that, and I'm glad that I did, because now I don't really want to do that kind of thing anymore, but I can appreciate now just I can appreciate elegant simplicity now in a way that's, I think, more deeply running than perhaps what most people have an appreciation for, because I spent so much time in a lot of musical sort of chaotic situations or super improvisational or whatever. But I've spanned a lot of things, but listenability has become a premium for me. Let's just put it that way.
Absolutely. And I think about, wanting to push the envelope. There are different ways to push it, like prog rock was kind of pushing it in terms of how many notes I can get in, how many different time signatures I can work in one piece.
It was part of this weird thing where that's actually how we sort of measured the validity of bands back then, was sort of by, you would consider one band just better because they were more complicated, or what, like there's some weird mathematics that you do, but it's sort of like, well, that guy can dunk from the foul line. Like, it's like this athletic consideration that you can't help but apply to music in some way at that time. And then the nuances, I think, start to come out after that. But it is something about the teenage mind, where you just, you know, it's just like everything. Like when you start drinking, you're like, I'm good. Everybody the next day is like, I had 10 drinks, or, you know, whatever. You're just like, it's this weird athletic competition, everything. Like I had the most massive bong hits or whatever it is. I don't know. Just everything has to be the extreme competitive almost, if not outright competitive. And
Well,
it's
that's
just part
like
of
the
the young
base
process.
level of anything, right? The base
Yeah.
level of understanding, you know,
Yeah.
things that we don't understand yet. You know, how do you measure them? You know, quantity or proficiency, you know, but the subtleties are not things that you get right away in
Yeah.
anything. And you know, just to complete the Rush conversation, because I was just, I think I told you this, you know, obviously it was very sad that Neil Peart, you know, passed not that long ago. And you know, I had become quite fond of the band, you know, over the time, and felt like really I don't know, it was just really sad to me.
Yeah.
And I went back and I rewatched the documentary, you know, the Rush documentary that's on Netflix. I can't think of the name of it, but they were showing, I think I told you, they were showing some of the old stuff, like, you know, their just the early days, their flyers and their set list, and they had the handwritten lyrics to the Necromancer. And it just, I was like, for a minute, I was like, is that Brian's fanzine? Because it was you and Eric Marola?
Yeah. When we were like 15, this is before we even could drive, we started an international Rush fan magazine for whatever reason. I don't know. Actually, I know exactly why, because we were basically criminals. But what we figured out was that we had been collecting all these bootleg recordings. People have to realize that everything wasn't available. You had to really physically go on the hunt for things. You know, now I can go on YouTube and watch the entire history of anything, all the weird, obscure tapes and shows or whatever. They're all there now. But back then, you had to like find the guy in Oslo that had like the third generation copy that's like the minimum watchable copy, because the first copy of it was so like rough cut and shot on 16 millimeter or whatever it is. So you find these, we would do these things where we would collect all these different bootlegs, and the ethos of all that culture is that you trade. You know, it's like, okay, well, I've got this show from Montreal, and it's, you know, this quality, and then I'll trade it for you to get this. And so we agree to it, and then we just mail each other VHS tapes or whatever. And that's how it worked back in the 80s, you know, and as you know. So so we realized that we had a shit ton of these bootlegs, and people really wanted them. And in our 15-year-old minds, we were like, well, why don't we just sell them? Which is totally illegal. And but that didn't stop us, because we just didn't, I don't know, we just didn't put two and two together or whatever. And so then we basically put a magazine around it, you know, write these kind of articles. I mean, it's all garbage, right? But we would put it together, the old mock-ups on the printer, the copy shop, and, you know, total old school thing, staple, bind, you know, whatever the things. And then we had like a subscription, and then people would subscribe we'd put ads in like Rolling Stone or these different big magazines, and then people would see them and then write your PO box and send you cash or whatever, or money orders. And then you would just do it. It's very organic. And so we had built this audience. By the time we were 16, none of these people knew that we were just little kids, I don't think. But we did have a thing in there where we were like selling bootleg tapes. And so people would be like, I want a subscription and that Montreal concert for $10 or whatever it was, which is totally, you know, we were duping stuff, you know, we had multiple VCRs, you know, it was just a whole racket. It was a big scam. But anyway, long story short, that magazine that we did, Eric recently contacted me and showed me that he had, I guess I don't have any of them, but he had like a stack of them, and he put them on eBay just a couple of months ago or something, and got some absurd amount of money for them.
Right.
So I don't know what, I can't, it's literally horrible, you know what I mean? But it's cool that kids did it. If you put it on like the scale of like some kids did that and they were real enthusiastic and kind of good for them, it's fine. But outside of that, so I don't know why anybody would buy them, but it was fun. That was, you know, being a kid was fun.
Absolutely. And, you know, no regrets. We all have things that, you know, it's funny because like there was a New Start fanzine, you know, that I did in the early 90s, and somehow the straight edge hardcore fanzine world, I feel like I'm copping out a little bit, but you know, I got dragged into some, I'll just say shit talking. You know, there was this thing between bands. We played in DC and we opened for this band and they only paid us $20, which wasn't cool. But my response is going to be to make a fake interview with them in my fanzine.
Nice.
Where I just say all kinds of terrible things and make it as if they're saying them. And I found that that edition of my fanzine, which was the basically shit talk all the bands that did us wrong. And I was like, do I destroy this? You know, because like I feel like the energy around that is just so negative, but you know, it's still sitting there. I mean, I don't know.
It's a good reminder of, hey, this is not what you want to do. So just maybe hold on to it.
Yeah. 30 years later, I think, you know, I finally figured it out. And
don't you think there's sort of a component of kind of pro wrestling vibe in all of that scene in that time anyway? Do you know what I mean? Like where you have to be, somebody's got to be the heel and there's got to be story arcs and there's got to, I mean, if you're creating print media around, and if you're making print media, independent print media in a non-internet world about bands in a regional situation, you got to drum up something, right? You can't just be like, hey, our new tape's out, bro.
Yep.
So
that's what it was. It was self-promotion and promoting the scene to some extent. You know, anytime, no such thing as bad publicity.
That's right.
So that's a good way to look at it. You know, there was nothing, there were certainly more harmful things being put out than that. But I just, you know, there's, I'm thankful to not be coming from that place now, you know, of like, somebody shorted me $20. I'm going to find a way to publicly defame them. What a petty, you know, but when you're 19, you're kind of petty, I guess, sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Feelings get hurt a little bit more easily, or it's hard to figure out what battles are, what hills are worth dying on. It becomes more clear as you get older.
This is the rebirth of Whole Earth Radio. And, you know, you are one of my, you know, friends from the spectrum of time doing a podcast that has been really consistent because, you know, it's funny. I got about 6 episodes into this before I kind of quit doing it. I'm coming back, changing course a little bit. But, you know, another podcaster told me the 7th episode was kind of this turning point for a lot of podcasts. Like if you make it that far, you're probably going to keep going with it. I don't know. That was just his determination, but you've been doing it now for like 3 years.
Yeah, almost. Although we've recently changed some things, but yeah, going from audio to now video, but essentially, yeah, we've been doing it pretty well every week for about 2.5 years.
And so it's you and Joe Nolan.
Yeah, Joe Nolan, who's a sort of a legendary kind of musician, artist, cult figure, writer, art scene sort of magnet and sort of filter. He's a very important person in the Nashville community, so it's really cool to do that with him. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, so I got that. I went, you know, I was definitely had to check out the, you know, the Cool Keith interview.
Oh yeah.
But I went back and I listened to the very first one, which as we were kind of alluding to earlier, you know, starting a podcast, you kind of just got to do the first few of them and then blow past them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, if I think about what the cool thing is that the idea and the concept that we had, which, you know, I can explain without being all vague about it, but just generally speaking, I just want to say that getting started, we did know what territory we wanted to sort of explore with it, but that we didn't know how best to do it. We didn't know anything about how to go about it really. But since I'm an audio engineer person, like setting up mics in a room for people to talk, it's like, God, this is the easiest thing ever. Like, yeah, it just seemed very low impact to get started, and it really is, you know, low impact. So we just kind of went at it, and you just didn't make any big plans and just said, let's just do it every week, and let's just do it every week. And it becomes like I don't know, just part of your process or your week, you know, or whatever. And then it's not so big of a heavy lifting kind of thing. You kind of put systems in place too, to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah. And I can definitely just outside looking in, see the evolution of, you know, podcasts are largely conversation, right? So there's kind of a conversation with you and Joe. And then, the conversations with other people. And, I will just, so it's not vague. The original premise of the show, and I didn't get this at first. I thought art fight was like maybe some metaphor, but
It
it's
is.
actually, but actually quite literal as well, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
your intention originally was to talk about art and to also talk about mixed martial arts.
Yeah. So it's funny because, I mean, really the origins are quite natural in the sense that, as I said, Joe Nolan is, always involved in everything that's going on in the Nashville art scene. And so he would always know what shows were happening and what gallery things were happening. And so he's in the middle of it all the time, whereas I'm sort of in and out. But of course, if I ever go out anywhere, it's on his sort of recommendation, whatever. And then ultimately he's there. So what was happening is we would be at these gallery shows, and he and I would be talking about, we just knew that we were both fight fans, right? Did you see the fights the other night? So here we are in these art galleries, right? With this sort of audience that you can stereotype as being maybe not fight fans, and really just always enjoying how much we liked to talk about it. And we would always invariably relate it to the art context, whether visual arts or music or whatever, because we're all involved in all of those things. So we just kept having these really at length great conversations sort of off in the corner or, whatever at these various events. And we were like, we should just do a podcast and just do exactly what we're doing right now, but just record it and then syndicate it and see whatever. And then that's what we did. And then, so we started out, it's more like easy to grab people, but still very interesting people. I mean, that's the cool thing about Nashville is you can, stone's throw, you're near amazing talent everywhere, and everybody kind of knows each other. It's still kind of small town in that vibe. So we basically got to a point where we started just doing this every week, and we started bringing in artists and bringing in fighters and bringing in people that train maybe jujitsu, but also do screen printing and just really exploring almost in a weird way to sort of not justify, but sort of explain like what, because Joe trains somewhat. I don't train, but I still find it incredibly interesting to watch, just in the same way like you don't play football, but a lot of people watch football, right? And you get really into the intricacies and all that, right? You still can very much appreciate it, but like I'm not going to have my brain slosh around in my head at this point. But but anyway, but the idea just that by continually sort of explaining the territory between art and combat sports, we ended up sort of incidentally churning up this whole sort of maybe subculture or whatever you want to call it, of people that are exactly in that space, authors that have written the definitive book about Bruce Lee, or, so we get to talk to these people about the creative challenges and what it is in their realm that is most interesting or challenging or whatever. But at the same time, the subject matter sometimes can be right on the nose, Bruce Lee's definitive autobiography. And other times, maybe it's a little less, maybe sometimes it's somebody that's a musician. The one with James Kamak, who's one of my favorite bass players, plays with Ahmad Jamal, legendary jazz bass player.
Yeah, I listened to that one. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, I mean, he was amazing, and I was just so honored to talk to him. So we didn't really talk about so it's not like we have this quotient or thing that we hold ourselves to. Sometimes it'll even go to where we have 4 or 5 episodes of kind of more art or music things or whatever, and illustrators or whatever. And then we might have a couple streaks where it's like really fight focused. And only recently have we sort of created some new segments, I suppose you want to call them that are outside of our normal, more free-flowing conversations, that now we sort of entertain more active comparisons between fighters and artists by doing this series called Versus, where we essentially choose a fighter and an artist or a creative of some kind, and sort of pit them in these imaginary battles against each other based on the same criteria that perhaps mixed martial arts or boxing uses to judge, but adapted for this creative modality. And then we kind of compare and contrast them through that, the fight rules sort of prism, and then come out with sort of a quote unquote winner. It's not about like who could beat the other one up. I mean, the last one we did was this fighter, Tony Ferguson, against Sun Ra. But the reason why we wanted to talk about them, it's really just a vehicle for us to be able to compare them and contrast them, because we find a lot of truth and a lot of universality in comparing people or figures like that. And that's the thing that we're always trying to explain to people. Like, they're like, why are you into fighting? Like, it seems like I can't stand blood and whatever. It's like, well, I'm not into blood either, but here's what I am into. I am into the magic that happens with creativity when your life or your consciousness depends on it, or your career or a lot of money. Prize fighting, you know, it really puts into perspective, you know, like, oh, I've got a lot of stuff to get ready for this exhibition, and I really hope that I'm having so much trouble with the PR. And, you know, like, really, is that your challenge? Like, you talk to these fighters, you know, that, you know, put themselves into that situation because they feel an irrational compulsion always to do it, and they will fight to be able to do it. It's not like they're being made to do it. It's not this old human cockfighting John McCain leftover stuff, you know, like, it's a very artful, very professionalized, very rule set oriented thing. It wasn't maybe always, and not in all capacities, but generally speaking. And it's also like the most gender inclusive and everything else sort of sport, as much as there's some reprehensible stuff going on inside the sport too. The MMA culture itself is also a neat prism to sort of be in. So this has led us to a lot of conversations with a lot of artists and a lot of fighters, but it's also led us to academics that teach classes about writing and fighting, you know, deep writing classes at American University, and then being involved in their panel discussions. And I don't know, it's just, there's all these little subcontexts that have sort of built over time. So it's just been a really naturally fun thing to do. So Art Fight Podcast, check it out.
So how did I got to ask you, you know, obviously the Nashville scene has been the jumping off point for a lot of the artists that you talk to in the conversation. How did Cool Keith get in the mix there? Did that kind of...
The way that came about was his manager or somebody had contacted me. I guess it was probably a couple of years ago now. Keith was coming to town to do some sort of a show, or yeah, he was coming to town to do a show, and I think they wanted to also film some stuff, and they also wanted somebody to go back up to Detroit or somewhere to film some stuff. And so they had reached out to me about some things relative to some of my video work, and then I'm not sure why that never materialized, other than just the general sort of disorganization that can happen in a lot of management scenarios. But anyway, that's where the conversation had started prior. And then when we were doing this podcast, you know, I was just like, I want to have Keith on. And sometimes, you know, my co-host Joe Nolan, you know, can't be as flexible as, say, I would like to be, to make sure that I get the Cool Keith conversation. You know, it's really hard to go to somebody like Cool Keith and say, listen, Thursday, 5 p.m. sharp, I need you to, you know, you kind of, there's certain characters I think that you kind of have to, you know, be a little flexible. It still had a time and schedule, but it's just the more people that are involved and the more tricky it gets. I don't know. So, and also there's something about, at that time we were doing telephone, you know, we weren't doing Skype or any of this kind of stuff. And we did several, you know, telephone things, but I always preferred people in person for the points I was making earlier, just about like actual conversations. But this is one of those where it's like, if I have to get them on the phone, if I have to do telegrams, if I have to do whatever, I really want to have this conversation. And, you know, it was maybe a little bit more my interest than perhaps Joe's. So I was able just to sort of get that and make it a one-to-one phone conversation, and then just get it done. And really, he's one of those, you just need to set him off, and you just kind of thumb sort of seedlings out into the conversation, and then you don't know what's going to happen. And it went exactly as planned, which is that there was no plan. It was great. I mean, to talk to heroes of yours and not be over, you know, to be an adult, right? And the people are people and humans are humans. And like, you're less mystified as you would be. Like if I was 21 and interviewing Cool Keith, it would have been horrible.
Yeah. I did some interviews with artists that really influenced me in that period of my life. And they were very, I mean, thank God I don't have copies of those fanzines, you know. Yeah. They were terrible, just the wrong. But yeah, you did a really good job in that one in particular, I thought, of relating to someone who's very unique, and most people, even people that are out, he's pretty out there. I mean, Sharkula here in Chicago, who I've worked with off and on for years, has done some stuff with Cool Keith, and they are both that way out in outer space, kind of avant-garde thinking, hip hop.
Kind of mystics, whether incidental or not, I don't know, but ultimately I see them as sort of mystics.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely channeling a freer kind of thinking. Like for me, it takes effort to shift gears to try to be in a freer, I don't know if it's free association or just like a free outlook to thinking. It's kind of like you're talking about being not compartmentalizing things and putting them in little boxes. And someone like Cool Keith, has been around the world, experienced many different things, and he just puts them through that same Cool Keith filter,
That's right.
And I respect that highly. I think it works for him. And
yeah, I can't live like that. But he does it. He's doing him, man. That's why I don't know. It's so authentic and so appreciated.
Well, the conversation was great, and I thought that you bodes well for if you have plans to do, because some people are not the easiest to interview, and I hear interviews with artists that I like that didn't go well.
Yeah.
And
I just try to make it not an interview. I set the tone for that very early. Like even in our communications with guests that are upcoming, or if we're dealing with their manager or whatever, we will actively rearrange. We will correct them in our language. They're like, well, so-and-so interview, we still on for the interview Thursday, whatever. And then we'll come back, and say, it's not an interview. We're just going to have a conversation. I mean, ultimately it is, I suppose, an interview, but I never, for good or for bad, I'd rather have an awkward conversation than a perfectly formatted conversation. So I don't really do a lot of, I definitely do prep, I suppose, where applicable or where needed. I don't feel the need to be the expert on that person and their career. And I don't feel the need to, the other thing I don't like, and it's a constant battle, is whenever it's hard not to think of, how do I explain this? When people are on the podcast, I want the listeners, to know who they are, but I don't want to have the sole informational burden to supply that information to the listener, to set up everything, to think of every podcast episode as this informative kind of island of responsibility of like, I'm introducing you to this person. So what got you, where did you start from? And then where'd you go to school and whatever, all the things.
I am the curator of Cool Keith universe.
Yeah, and just, it's a pain in the ass, and it takes away from the stuff that it always ends up. Nobody has a great conversation because they were just rewinding their past. People have a good conversation because they stumbled upon something, or they had a mutual realization, or they had a laugh, or they had an argument, or I don't know, what a contention. Anything's better. You got to always think about it as like you're creating something new, or you want to elicit something new out of the person. And it doesn't always work like that. Some people are more amenable. Some people are more guarded. You kind of have to just sort of feel it out. And there's other scenarios too, where like we'll have somebody back on the podcast. And then the first one was perhaps maybe a little bit more trust building. And so when we have somebody back on, people can, we're free of having to, we both mutually know that we're free of having to explain who the fuck they are or whatever.
Right.
So anyway, so yeah, I think that having a podcast and running it for 2.5 years now has been super helpful for how I approach everything else that I'm doing. And it's been great. So I think the way to think about a podcast in the best form is like, what can I do in the same way that you would think about maybe working out or eating healthy or whatever else it is that somebody might do to feel better, take walks, having something ritualized that is enriching and connects you to people and enhances your process outside of that particular effort, then it's just, that means it's something healthy and it's something good. And so just keep doing it. Even if you kind of sometimes don't feel like it or whatever, you just kind of, just do it.
No, that's really good. I think that kind of applies to, for lack of a better word, it's a very mature perspective that one kind of comes to, I would think, after doing it different ways, in different projects. But, and I think that's the great thing about something regular, like a regular gig, a regular podcast, is that it's like a regular, like maybe for some people, this is not my forte, but I'm just saying like a standing appointment with a personal trainer, or even any kind of standing appointment with some kind of life coach, or whatever people do, a book club, different things like that keep people rooted and anchored.
Yeah.
And when they just, man, and this is really weird context for this discussion, right? But, when people don't feel like going out, which right now doesn't matter too much if you feel like going out, although I don't know how it is everywhere with lockdown. But I did want to talk about Fognode because,
sure.
you're, and this kind of relates to the podcast and not giving people a biography, I mean, like
Sure.
you didn't give people, hey, Cool Keith was in Ultramagnetic MCs and then he went solo. But even on your own, like I listened to that first episode of Art Fight, and you were kind of trying to, it sounded like, give a short bio of your own work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like, I felt your pain, because it was kind of like you don't want to, if you just read off a list of things, I've been in these bands, or I've done these things, I've produced these artists, that sounds a little off, or like just, it doesn't mean it. It's just a list of things, But you mentioned, I don't know if it was I think in the Cool Keith interview, you mentioned, and I was not aware of this, kind of like the Knitting Factory connection. Like you were in New York, like 07 to...
Well, no. So I've lived in New York twice, but the first time was when I was in my early 20s, when I left North Carolina and our beautiful home state. I went to New York City with nothing and no plan, and just figured it out. But I knew that I didn't have any money really, but I knew that I wanted to see all these shows, and I knew that I didn't have the money to see the shows. And 90% of the shows that I wanted to see were at the Knitting Factory down in Tribeca back in the mid 90s, in 95. So I went down there and I basically just found whoever I needed to talk to. I just went to the sound man and just said, look, here's my situation. I just moved here from North Carolina. All I'm interested in here, or in New York City right now, ultimately, is what's going on in this building. I don't have the money to come see shows. I will sweep the floors. I will help you set up. I'll do whatever, but will you please give me something that I can do so that I can just get in for free? I don't care about being paid. You don't have to put me on the payroll, nothing. Just let me in when you see me here, when I'm not working. And they were like, yeah, cool, no problem. So I started, and at that time, I'd been playing drums, but I was not a sound person. I didn't understand engineering or anything at that point very much. And then he put me in as sort of his assistant running sound. So here I am, 23 years old, just kind of barreled into New York City with just whatever I had in my car, and barreled my way into the Knitting Factory and got a sort of job, so to speak. And my first night there, he was already leaving me in places with the whole board and everything that's going on in positions of responsibility. And like right away, like I didn't understand half of what was going on. I didn't understand mixing consoles or monitor mixing, or, I didn't understand any of this stuff. And I was just like, when you're 23, you're like, I'll figure it out. Like,
you don't want him to think
at the expense of possibly everyone else here, I will figure it out.
If you believe in yourself, everyone else will.
Yeah, I mean, just be dumb enough to get ahead, I guess. But anyway, so I started running sound. My first night, I remember, it's this drummer named William Hooker was playing, and it was a trio. It was him and this guy DJ Olive and somebody else, and I can't remember who the third person was. Maybe, you know what? I think it was just DJ Olive and William Hooker, I think is what it was. And I was already fans of these musicians, and here I am sort of in this position running sound. And I'll never forget that the engineer guy that actually worked there, he wanted me, last minute, William Hooker comes to the sound booth. He's like, can somebody do an introduction for us or whatever? And he's like, Brian, you go do it. So then all of a sudden I'm on the stage and I'm introducing the William Hooker group or whatever it was. And I mean, I had been there like a day, so what I learned in that time was go to the source. Do not pass go. Do not waste any time. All the time that I could have, like, especially when you grew up in a town like we did, the outside world seemed like it's like we were in this bubble that we had to pierce this veil to get out and through to the rest of the actual world. The internet's maybe made this seem less, but when we were young, we didn't have all that. It seemed like what you were reading about in magazines and newspapers was mythology, So anyway, I just cued into this reality at that time of like, man, you got to go to the source. You got to go to the source. So that's what led me to my next thing, which was, a year later, calling up one of my favorite drummers in Seattle and saying, hey man, do you need a drum tech or whatever? I mean, I literally got his number out of information and cold called him. And he was like, after we talked for a good while, and he's like, come on out. 2 weeks later, I moved out to Seattle, and, and then again, it's like 2 weeks later, I'm with, hanging out with Elvin Jones or whatever. It was just surreal. So I've just really benefited from early on, just seeing the cause and effect of just go to the source and be in the middle of wherever you want to be and just be there.
Yeah, no, that is a great description of a lot of things. That I when you talk about the internet in that way, that made me think of something else, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. But the evolution of Fog Node obviously came from was that later than the Fog the Knitting Factory?
Yeah, I can lay that out. So in that time in '95 at Knitting Factory, that was when I first got my hand on sort of the sound dials and started to understand engineering on any basic level. Then when I moved out to Seattle, as I just kind of was talking about, that's where I really got into learning because I had to do the gigs that I was doing out there and being a drum tech and whatever, being in these studios and I just started to learn everything and getting gear of my own and starting to experiment with recording and sampling and, music on computers, and all that was very hard to do back then. And I was very interested in it. So what happened was I got into Seattle in '96. By the time like '98 came around, I had really started to develop my curiosity with making music on computers, because now, and people don't understand it, it's hard for people to realize this, but back then, to have any media to record onto that wasn't just awful was really difficult. And so when computer recording came about, and you could actually record onto a computer without having an expensive Tascam DA88, or ADATs or DAT machines, and all those machines were super expensive. If I could just get this stupid office computer that has Netscape Navigator on it to somehow just record 4 tracks of audio, I'm in a new world, And so I was working really hard on hot rodding computers to get stuff to work. And I started to have some progress, and I had some peers and people that were on the same quest. So by the time '98 came, I'd started to really start to deviate from just playing drums to using sounds and becoming more of a sound artist in my explorations. And then in '98, I moved in May of '98 to Nashville. And then immediately what happened there was I was making a lot of beats and sounds and doing weird stuff. But my wife at the time was a songwriter, and here we are in Nashville, and there's all this incredible songwriting talent around us. And people started coming to me being like, what are you doing? Here I am fresh off of like being in these avant-garde music scenes in New York and Seattle and all this. And then all of a sudden I come to Nashville in the '90s, and people are like, what? And I was from outer space. You're doing the music how? And like, what are you doing? And so these songwriters would start to look to hire me to produce like kind of demo, like cool demo tracks, or maybe stuff for a record, and I was just testing the waters, like, can I even do that? What would happen if I took actual songwriting and harmony construction and melodic construction, and people actually had to write songs that people actually want to listen to besides this craziness that I'm doing? And then how do I sort of like put it together? And I was doing a lot of field recording and creating a lot of just the palette now is crazy. You hear everything now, but back then it seemed really different, I suppose, in some ways. And so that was where I got started kind of working with songwriters. And then as I started to really appreciate the songwriting craft, I started to be able to hone my own music into more organized music. And that's what gave birth to this project Fognode, which, by the way, is a joke. It's a nickname that somebody gave me. I don't know if the story is worth telling, but essentially there was a Brooklyn dub label called Word Sound Recordings that was really awesome back in the 90s. And this friend of mine who went under the name Corporal Blossom was doing a track for them. And I had contributed to this track and I couldn't be on the track with my normal name. And he just made up this goofy name and sent it off and didn't tell me. And that's how it got printed. And so long story short, that's how I got this, this nickname that nobody wants. So, or asked for. But I just figured, what the hell, I'll start releasing music under that name. So I put out my first Fognode record in 99, and then did that moniker for about 8 years, doing titles under that name. And then since I've developed, in the spirit of like Kool Keith, like we were talking about earlier, like, right, he was the person that showed me that you can just choose an alias for whatever musical mood you're in, and then make records under that musical mood and name, and then move on, you know. And
yeah,
so
Sharkula's good for that too. He's got perhaps more aliases than anyone. He's got Chicagost, and I think there's something about the I mean, I could go on Forest Face, Dirty Gilligan. I think maybe you could measure
Gilligan.
like you could measure the brilliance of a rapper to some extent by how many aliases they have, you know.
Yeah.
MF Doom has about 1 million of them, you know.
Yeah.
But I like Fognode. It's memorable, you know. But I gotta give you congratulations here, because one of your records was just voted one of the 50 most influential to come out of Nashville.
I'll clarify all of this for you, and thank you. First of all, it's actually this happened a few years ago, but it was Bob Dylan's birthday, so I thought to repost that. But there was a long-standing column in Nashville's paper called the Nashville Scenes, like the culture rag, and it's really great writers. But anyway, this great writer, local music encyclopedia, this guy named Ed Hurt, he wrote a series a few years ago where he had basically looked at Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde as being this sort of bellwether kind of moment in Nashville, in terms of recording and what records came out of Nashville and all this. And so what he investigated was, what are the top sort of, not top, but like sort of, he wanted to highlight 50 albums that came out of Nashville since Dylan's Blonde on Blonde to now, that had some sort of an effect or illustrated something unique about Nashville, or, you know, so it was considered sort of important to the, you know, and obviously a lot of records come out of Nashville. So to me, an experimental record that I made in 2001, have that be mentioned in that kind of, from somebody that I really appreciate, like Ed, like that's really cool, but it's not any real thing. It's just what somebody wrote and doesn't really mean anything.
Well, I tell you, as a musician who has done a lot of peripheral projects that you just kind of put it out to
Into
put it
the
out.
ether.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when you see that feedback to you. But I do think you talk then and now, you know, how different, trying to impart to my teenage children, you know, how different then was, you know. It just becomes a cliche, right? It's like a Facebook meme. This is how we dialed a telephone, you know.
Yeah.
But when you get past that, you know, how different is it? What things are significantly different? The internet really has got to be the standout. You know, I think desktop recording definitely leveled the playing field, as you were kind of alluding to.
Yeah. It's all the same. I mean, internet technology, all of it, it's all been the thing that has enabled and cursed us at the same time. We're the last of the breed, man. We're the last of the fully sort of organic humans.
Yeah, maybe.
Biotech, all the people are going to get stuff implanted soon, and, you know, or now already. You know,
Elon
biohacking.
Elon Musk has a Neuralink. Have you seen that?
Yeah, and I mean,
what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that everything to sort of explode in this sort of under the guise of progress, this Western civilization will meet its natural outcome. I don't think that we'll see it or the next generation, but I mean, this is not sustainable. So we'll see where it ends up, man.
Well, yeah, and I think that would
We
be
won't see.
Well, and I think sustainability is an important discussion. I'm glad you said that word, because I mean, I think
I kind of hate that word too, because it's just used a lot. Also, I used to have a person that I worked for that I really didn't like, and she would say substainable. This is not substainable.
Substainable. I see now. I see why you don't like the word.
Yeah, that would just capped off my. Yeah, but anyway, but yes, carry on.
Well, it's any word if you just deal with it in the abstract. Words like sustainable, holistic, and even worse, as a marketing person, if they're used for marketing, they just really quickly come to mean absolutely nothing except I think this might be a category of product I would like to purchase. Which is not the intent, I think, of most people who've given it much thought, but I mean, real sustainability is, it takes a lot of work, and process to address the actual sustainability, as we all throw out our garbage, every week. And that's the biggest, I mean, to get into real sustainability would take a conversation and probably advanced degrees that neither you or I have focused on sustainability. But I think generally that I would hope that society and culture as a whole values that when they see it as a real thing, rather than the disposability of, but we're not there yet. So who knows what's coming, like you say.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, I think also just doing a lot of creative work, it's always been about, that's the thing that, I need something in my sphere that I can control the outcome of, or how much energy goes into it and what it does. And everything's quite overwhelming these days. So I think it's even more important to have some reason to, like, I can control this. I can, the larger causes that we're speaking to. I mean, my brain's shot on all this stuff, man. I just want to, there's also a thing too, where it's like, I don't know if it's bad or not, but I just feel like as I'm getting older, I'm like, I just want to make sure I enjoy as much as I can, because, I mean, I'm all about sort of, fight the power, and all that, but man, I have to tune out sometimes, and I really monitor my intake on just it all. I feel like even if I was gone tomorrow, at least I feel like I've left enough things to be like, I'm very much not important. But even in that capacity, I was able to produce these things that I hope to spawn this type of thinking or whatever it is. And somebody might hear or check something out in some way that affects them in a positive way or something. Great. If I did that for one person and then I kick it, like, cool, then everything is a success and there was a reason for it. Everything after that, I don't know. So I just feel like my constitution generally is just like, I don't know, man. I don't want to be a negative Nancy here, but it just feels like control what you can, like what you can fully actually control, and just focus. Start very local, like right in front of you.
I don't think that's negative at all. I think that's actually very positive to learn. It's like, God, that's like the serenity prayer or something. Change the things we can and accept the things we can't, and to learn the difference. Not that I'm in sobriety or anything. I like that saying. My grandmother used to have it on the wall in her kitchen, but I do think, I was watching an interview with Geddy Lee talking about R40 and kind of how the band wound down, how Rush wound down. And I thought it was just really nice, to hear. And at the end of the documentary, when they're all having some wine and sitting around having dinner, those are nice things as a fan. And to sort of like, well, that makes me happy that we all shared this, the fans shared this music with them, and then it was able to end this very nice
it closes
note.
the loop of necessity to each other.
When I feel bad about not keeping up on current music, you can still kind of go back, and there are things that you didn't pay attention
put together
to.
Yeah, totally. I get really excited when I listen to something that I've listened to many times, and I hear some other aspect of the mix or some other subtle detail, or you ever have this thing where you realize that you've always heard the lyrics of a particular song incorrectly, or never really actually knew what this word that this person was saying, and then however you figure it out, sometimes it just clicks. You just be passively listening to it, and it's like, oh wait, that's what he's really saying there. And then it totally shifts your entire perception of the meaning of the song that you've been casually enjoying, thousands of times since you were 14 years old or whatever, or even younger. I love it when that happens. It just means that any work is alive and can punch you in the back of the head at any time.
Yeah, no, real art or good art has depth, and finding your own meaning or your own perception of it is so key, I think, to happiness and contentment. This book, Cybernetics, which I think is really interesting. I've, Norman Wiener, it's Cybernetics and the Human Use of Human Beings. And this came out in the 1950s. So somebody tells me this is the key here. Well, okay, I'm going to pull it out and read it. And it really was taking this almost zeitgeist-like deconstruction of human society and relating technology back in the 1950s. So I think that's kind of it. Maybe if I could there's a million different ways to look at cybernetics. I think it's become a whole field of study, but maybe the idea of artists taking things apart to put them back together again.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and then new forms even come about, to do that. I mean, it seems like it's been going on for a long time, but really sampling is quite new in terms of, the last 30 something years. So you think about how much recontextualization plays into creating new work or reperceiving previous work, or like now we're in a place where media and non-destructive collaging and just everything else, we're only in the beginning of even what that can be. I mean, and even when you see like sort of the technology of like deep fake technology or transcription technology or AI or any of these things, you start to just see that, of course, all of that is going to be used for sinister, awful shit. That's just the way that humans are, and that's what we do. At the same time, all of those things afford us the counterbalance, which is the immense amount of creative opportunities that will come up with all that we can't even really readily perceive or understand right now. So I feel like it's horrifying, and I'm not sure I want to be around for its fruition necessarily. Like, I'm not really interested. It's kind of like probably how when I was in my early 20s hacking away at a compact computer, trying to give it 8 megabytes of RAM so that it cannot die after recording 60 seconds of audio, and pulling my hair out to get that to happen way back in the day with early computers. That's why my whatever parents or grandparents or people that were around me, none of them were interested in doing that. I was, and so now flash forward, here we are, like, I feel like here's the level that I'm going to go, and here's the stuff I'm going to mess with. And then here's where I'm just going to draw the line. I don't want to be like an eminent futurist and on the bleeding edge of everything. At the end of the day, I need to take whatever languages I've learned creatively and tools I've learned creatively and just start making the most succinct shit that I can possibly make before I don't have a chance to make it anymore. And that's how I look at it. But it is weird though to, like, I've never stopped. Like, I haven't had, it's something got set off, and then I haven't I haven't stopped. It doesn't mean that I'm working at the pace that I think I should. But man, I mean, because we haven't even talked about, and we don't need to get into it, but I started experimenting with drone photography and videography 4 years ago.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So now I have essentially like a drone company. I do a lot of film work and documentary film work, and then that's gotten me into all these other things. And then I do video art, and I got an artist in residence thing here in Nashville to take archival film footage that had never been seen before, and then mix it with stuff that I'd been making using drones and whatnot, and then creating video art installations and pieces out of it. And I don't know.
Is there a website that
You
would
just
be
go
that?
to thosedrones.com, has my music, my drone work, my documentary work, fine art work. Everything's in one spot.
Cool.
Thosedrones.com. Yeah.
Well, I will definitely put that at the.
Sure. Yeah. But so, I mean, but I think that for me, the challenge has always been, I'm interested in a lot of different things. So how do I make it all sort of happen together? And this is the thing you brought up when we first were talking, I think is the most interesting thing that we could possibly dig into, which is just the pros and cons of that compartmentalization of the things that you're doing. And sometimes you do have to wall things up and partition things because it's just not healthy or whatever. But generally speaking, with all the different stuff, I think
you find more kindred spirits sometimes if you specialize, or if you.
I know what you mean, but ultimately it's not natural, and no one's really actually only in one realm. Even the most advanced people that I know that I envy a lot, I always envy people that do something very simple and they've been doing it their whole life and they're an expert. My friend Jeff, he's a saxophone player. What do you do, Jeff? I play saxophone. And even the thing that he does, he can carry it around. He can show it to you, and he doesn't need electricity to work. Like, it's just something really amazing about anybody that plays like a violin or a saxophone. To me, like, those are the people that are the luckiest people on earth, because they figured out, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to do it really, really well. And that thing is very simple and easy to understand, but hard to master and infinitely curious.
But isn't it true that the grass is always greener, and that
Yes.
that guy might say, well, I really envy my friend Brian, who has all these diverse range of interests.
Me, but maybe somebody like me. Yeah. So, but yeah, the idea just being that, but my point really is, like, even those people with such singular focus, they still have other stuff that they're doing. I mean, like my friend Jeff, he's also a photographer. He's also a teacher. He's also and he's also touring the world all the time. So it's just this everybody in reality is playing 5 roles and doing 5 things. So.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really interesting. I think that that's cool that you put it all together in one website, and that's appropriate for this rebirth of the Whole Earth Radio podcast, because that was kind of, as we were talking about at the beginning, sort of my intention to synthesize a little more some of my diverse range of interest just by talking to people like yourself that
self media.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there are a lot of things we have talked about in this conversation, a lot of different things. And I think we've identified 4 or 5. We could do the whole progressive rock episode interview. There's so many things to talk about, but I think it's really hopefully given people, it gives people, if they listen to this, kind of some insight into some things that you're doing that they may not have been aware of. And even if they know you, maybe not everybody who knows you knows about Fognode.
And honestly, like, that's like a time in my life, like that's just one phase. That's the other thing I like about having multiple things that you do, is you can assign them to times in your life. Like, I don't really make records under that name anymore, or in that style, or in that way, but that stuff lives on. And then I've got, other things I'm doing now, and then there'll be some other thing that's the next thing. So, but yeah, I think that the idea that maybe just there's not a golden rule perhaps, but that there is a huge value to figuring out how to artfully synthesize the seemingly disparate things that you do into something that is combinate and regenerative and feeds one thing into the next and perhaps has some greater yield as a whole than the dire pursuit of one singular walled effort.
Yeah, and I definitely, I have been a victim of that in my own mind. I don't know how you'd say that, but like, it's like being in a band, when you're in a band, and I mean like a rock band or like even worse, a punk rock band, that is your life. It's like being in a gang, and it's like, this is the band. This logo is like our crest. This is like my family crest. And it just is such an immersive thing. And then when it ends, like when Naked Angels broke up for me in the 90s, it was like the first real band I'd been in. And we dragged it out as long as we could with different lineups and things. But it was time to, I think one of my best friends, it was our bass player, had enough. He was like, okay, I'm going home, tired of this shit, bye. And I totally respected that. And we're still friends. It was absolutely the right time to throw in the towel. But, then I've got to start. It's like when your identity comes through a project or an endeavor that has obvious limitations, which is like anybody who's been in a big band or even a small band that was big to them, or a musical or even a solo musical project. When you end that, I think, depending on how much you identify with it, or when you end a project that you strongly identify with, there's that impetus to find a new project, start a new project. But I really like that idea of kind of what you're saying, that maybe it doesn't have to be so segmented or
just, it can be, but just maybe don't think about it that way, I guess is what I'm saying. It's sort of like, if you think about, I'm going to pursue this path, I want to pursue photography because I feel like it will inform other aspects that are, or cultivate things in me that are necessary, perhaps, that feed into challenges that I'm having in another arena. I need to be more patient or whatever. Or, like in the case of, for me, I guess I'm just saying, like, if you're working on a music project, it takes you forever to make a record, like it's awful. But, so when you're doing work like that all the time, you need something that gives you immediate gratification. And maybe going out and shooting street photography is like, especially in the digital realm now, like you get that thing where like, I set out to create, I created something, and now I'm enjoying or getting some sort of feedback from that process. Meanwhile, I'm making a record that's going to take me 12 weeks to make, or I'm editing a documentary, or I'm doing whatever. You have to have an array of things to inform or solve for the challenges or deficits that are left perhaps by other things. That's how it's worked for me, at least. And then with the podcast, not to loop things back around to that too consciously, but for me, doing our podcast has been the thing that keeps me like sort of a handhold to reality. Because the more you create and the more that you're just off in your own world, the more you just kind of become unmoored. And so, there's something to me about having conversations on a ritualized basis about the things that I'm interested in with people that I find interesting. That's way more valuable to me than just like the empty gestures of going to a social gathering, or like, we're having a party, come over. What are you guys bringing the casserole? Like, fuck, like I want it all to be the same. Like if I'm spinning a bunch of plates, I still want them to go towards the greater sort of banquet that is whatever the amalgamation of your life force and results of your life force coming through. It has to amount to something. So make them complementary. Don't put hard rules around it, I don't think, but there's ways to look at it. Because I guess I hear people all the time saying like, man, I would love to make more music, but man, I'm just so busy with my other job or whatever. And it's like, I can't tell. I mean, I've worked in marketing company. I've done marketing for tech companies. I've done some really high pressure, intense work in the professional realm, and every bit of that experience and knowledge and the politics and how to get a group of people to agree on an idea or any of the other things, a million ways that I've benefited as an artist to suffer a day job or whatever. So you got it, but it's up to you to draw those correlations and make that work. And the number one thing that keeps people from doing that is because they have the sense of what you talked about, like your identity gets wrapped up in it. And that's the shit that you got to just let go of, especially now. Because remember, like we were talking about before, like my favorite thing in the world is that no one really cares. Just always remind yourself.
Yeah,
like,
in a very reassuring and
right. I know, but I'm a bit of a, I'm not a nihilist or anything, but you know, I might have tendencies depending on what time it is. But you know, but it's one of those things where there's a documentary called "I Like Killing Flies." I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's about the guy that was the Soup Nazi character on Seinfeld was based on a restaurateur in the West Village that was an actual guy. And he developed this, you know, he had this little restaurant that was going through all these trials and tribulations and whatever. And the documentary is called "I Like Killing Flies." And he's just a really brash character. But at the end of it, he's just driving around in his car and he's talking about his kids. And he's just like, you know what I tell my kids? I tell my kids they're not shit. That's what I tell my kids. You know, and the idea, like, maybe that's a little harsh and, you know, a little blunt.
Maybe.
But generally speaking, it's like this whole thing of I don't know. You can't make it up for yourself. You just got to do it. You just got to be it, and don't expect any handouts. And make sure that you suck at something really bad, because if you haven't done that, then you haven't lived.
Let me just tell you, my thought is that if our kids, like if kids when we were kids needed someone, their friends, the world to take them down a notch, you know, like you're saying, you need somebody to tell you, hey, you know, you're not as great as you think you are, you know, and maybe you are, but you need to kind of, like, you know, it's a check and a balance, because you think you're so great, somebody says, yeah, you're not so great, you know, it all evens out. I think that's sort of the idea of we don't want to scar anyone for life, right? But I think the culture now is so critical that, man, you don't need any buddy to bring you down a notch, because
it'll be
the body shaming on social media,
bullying. Yeah, I'm so glad we're not. Imagine we this. How lucky are we that we didn't have to deal with any of this? You know,
well, if they were going to bully us, they had to look us in the eye. You know, they couldn't. They couldn't send us a meme. You know, but
that's right.
Well, and you know what you could say then versus now, which is, are people more cruel or less cruel? You know, it's a cruel world.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, and certainly with my kids, that it's funny. I will tell you this, you know, I have probably been too much as a parent, and my daughter would definitely agree with this, on the side of look on the bright side, positive thinking, and very, which can be very forced, right? You know, and when they were little, I was just really into various kinds of positive thinking that, you know, when you first hear it, can be pretty radical, and it's not, if it's not from somebody you construe as corny. But if you hear it from somebody, let's say, you know, most of the heroes of today aren't like this. Like Elon Musk is like just a negative son of a bitch, you know, like I don't know how anyone's going to be inspired by that. But let's say there was somebody you looked up to, or anyone looked up to, that could say, you can go out and do it. You can start that fanzine, you can open that club, and that would actually mean something.
Yeah.
That kind of inspirational message, I think, is worthwhile. And if it connects with the right person at the right time, it's really helpful and meaningful. That's what I've been trying to give my kids since they were little. And so my daughter's now, you know, both my kids are now teenagers. She's had enough of it, you know, and she's a very cool, balanced person, but she doesn't want to hear any more look on the bright side shit, you know. And when
that's because when you're 16, you're decoding the world and on a new level, right? And you're getting angry because you realize that you're being brought into a system that is abhorrent and has been neglected for generations. And what am I doing? Like, this is nuts. Everything is not what you thought it was, not as promised. And so when you're 16, just like you were and we were, like around the last freaking time we talked, I mean, we were angry. And you need to have room to feel it and have that feeling, because if people say you're like immediately just look at the bright side, it is you want to.
Well, I think the other way to look at that is maybe not look at the bright side, but hey, we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah,
if we don't fix this,
I get it. Yeah, like be positive and I'm
be
all about that.
proactive.
Yes,
You can
like,
sit
keep
around
thinking about it.
whining, you know,
Correct.
or
That's
you
right.
can do something, you know. And I have to be that saying something like that is very humbling, because
Yeah.
I think that I've done a few things, but you know, there's so much more than what I'll ever be able, you know, the system and things that are broken, like broken systems are so much bigger than any of us.
Yeah.
That like what, you know, but then again, I think you kind of made this point. You make a difference on a small scale. You can make a difference locally. You can make a difference in one person's life.
right.
So maybe that's the most positive message, is not you change the world. It's that you change the world by changing one person.
Yeah, I mean, just if you ever hear back in life like one person that calls you out as being the reason or part of a reason why you did something else that was good for you, then you've won. Like you've contributed to the progression of humanity towards whatever end we're meeting. But you know what I'm saying? Like you've done your job. I mean, that's the best. That's way better than like, oh, that guy, yeah, he murdered my brother. Like that's, you don't want to be on that list, you know, but it's easy to be on the like, hey, you know what? You know, going to school with Rob and seeing him hustling all those shows made me realize I could probably do the same thing on some level for in the way that I want to do it, or I want to play music. I don't know what that's about, you know, but like on our podcast tomorrow, we're having Wayne White, who is a legendary sort of artist, Tennessee native, but you probably know his stuff from Pee-wee's Playhouse. He did all the set design for all that, you know, all the characters in Pee-wee's Playhouse, all that business. And also a lot of imagery that we sort of take for granted, like, you know, Smashing Pumpkins video with like the blimp thing, and you know, he's Peter Gabriel's Big Time video, you know, he did all of those visuals, and he's done a lot of art direction and a lot of other types of work, and still doing great, amazing installations and paintings and all kinds of, I mean, there's a documentary on him, whatever. Anyway, he's going to be on tomorrow, but what I love about like getting back to this sort of like being egoless or just making a mockery of like the wrapping up of identity in your work, I was just looking here, like the title of his book, it's like a 400-page sort of print book that he put out years ago, I think now, but it's called Maybe Now I'll Get the Respect I So Richly Deserve. And then his documentary, the documentary on him is called Beauty is Embarrassing. And that right there, I mean, even if people are not familiar with his work, you should know that it's worth checking out now, because he's one of those people that he can do anything that he wants, and there's no limits to his life and creativity, and whatever he wants to do, he can do it. And he puts out his book, Maybe Now I'll Get the Respect I So Richly Deserve. Man, that made me so happy. Made me so happy to see that. So anyway, that'll be a fun show to do for us tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, I will definitely check it out. So you're recording it tomorrow, but when does it go up?
We do live shows now. And then it also will be, so here's how it works. We have a Tuesday show and a Thursday show. The Tuesday show is sort of a segment show. We do this thing called Versus, where we sort of do that compare and contrast with maybe a fighter and an artist and talk that out and have fun with that. That's our little thing on Tuesday. And then Thursday's our main day. That's our usual hour plus long, maybe conversation with figures in art and combat that we find interesting, or media or whoever. And we do them live. It's live 5 p.m. Central on Thursdays. Is the time for the main episodes. So Thursdays at 5 is like the thing to remember if you want to see it live. But ultimately, all the stuff is going to YouTube, Twitter, everywhere, all the time, and you can find it afterwards. And we do everything. The other reason why I like to do things this way is because I want everything as much as possible that we make to not be. I mean, Wayne's coming on to talk about a music video, recent project type thing. And I know that that's how the PR world works, but I'm always interested in like how little time can we spend about, I don't know. I just want to have conversations that are, you know, as marketers would say, evergreen. I want to have, I don't want to have a list of past episodes that are talking about topical things that are irrelevant now, especially like now. I want to have just a catalog that I've built of conversations with people that I think are doing interesting things. And so that's the other part of the mission there. It's inevitable. You're going to talk about topical things on some level or talk about people's latest project, but I try as much as I can to steer that stuff out, because what's interesting to me is kind of like what you were talking about, like revisiting things with the complexion of time to compare against it makes it actually more valuable and more interesting often. And so I like to try to do things where it's not as disposable. So yeah, Art Fight podcast, and it'll be live on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook every Thursday at 5, and also other things. Check it out.
Very cool. Well, hey man, thanks for taking the time. This has been really fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man, and I appreciate you and anything that you're doing. I'm still paying attention, and I'm still always appreciating what you're doing and what you're up to next. And it's a cool thing, in that way that you were talking earlier about sort of the importance of closing loops or connecting past to present. This conversation is an embodiment of that, so it's really cool, man.
Yeah, no, it's been good to catch up with you. I mean, I think there's just so much, and we only have so much time, so our focus is what it is, but it's really good.
Hit me up.